we tend to believe that our future self is a superpower. I say dare to be average, likely to get that goal and then be able to raise the goalpost for yourself without feeling like you keep failing on your goals.
2025, what would you see as your biggest watch out? Welcome to the Alex Perry on Fire podcast, and this is the inaugural New Year's resolution podcast. And I want to welcome Laine Distefano. She has been on the podcast before. She is my therapist, but she's also much more than that. And I'm excited today to get your take on what New Year's resolutions mean, and are they really purposeful when we set them?
Okay. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you. New Year's resolutions. I'm a big fan of taking the time, taking the opportunity. Every year, it's sort of a natural thing to think about what's next, what's coming for the future, what can I do better. There is a drawback, though, when it's only New Year's resolutions. I think the most depressing day of the year is January 14th. So when people sort of give up on that idea, like 2 weeks later, we do see like sort of a significant depression. So I think for me, I want to always be setting goals like year round, that it's like, okay, I noticed that I made a mistake here. I failed at this. How can I turn this thing that was the pits this week into the peaches, next week or beyond? So always be growing, always be working, not just on New Year's. But I love that New Year's also presents a time that we sort of think about that and grow.
You are the first guest for this New Year's. And what I'm leaning on from you as I go and talk to previous guests to try and find out what their New Year's resolutions are and really have them go deep into something that I think I can learn from and maybe hold myself accountable, or the audience might resonate with them. Mm-hmm. What do you think would be, and this is a tough question, but a great way to approach that with someone? And I say that because suppose the audience is listening, they may, I hope they are listening, will be able to ask, someone who's close to them, a mother, father, son, a good friend, but what's the best way to go about it besides your just typical, give me your New Year's resolution?
I think if we're having really vulnerable, honest conversations with one another, it would be like, what did we fail at this year? What did we not do well this year? And you'd have to be open enough to say, I failed at doing this. I failed at, being present as much as I would like to be. And then say, okay, then you could say, how would I like to improve that? What could I do better next year?
I actually love that. And if I took it a step further, it'd be like, look, I appreciate you. We have a special relationship. This is what I learned from you this year. This is what I learned from being in your presence. This is what I learned that I can work on. Mm-hmm. And how do I grow from that? And how do you grow from that? Mm-hmm. And I think it's a softer approach to basically saying, I'll be vulnerable with you. Mm-hmm. I'll let you know that I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
But I also like doing it in a positive spin, right? Because it's an opportunity for growth. So I think you don't want to just be, everything's
great.
Don't
ask them what they failed at.
And nothing's bad, but almost like, if I was talking to Elliot, which I am going to talk to Elliot, mm-hmm. and I think the audience will hear, I'll bring him on.
Cool.
But it's just being really real vulnerable, but being super excited about what's to come for us.
Yeah. And I use the word fail sort of specifically. There was the Spanx founder talked about in her household that they regularly celebrated failures because that gave them a point to know where they could course correct. So she talked about the peaches in the pit. So every year or every day at the dinner table, they'd say, what are your pits today? What are you failing at? What are you struggling with? And the problem with that is people don't A, want to admit failure, and B, when things cause us pain. So if you're really bad at math, you don't want to go to math class. You might want to shy away from it. You might want to lean out when it's the most painful, because things that we're not good at are things that we don't want to do, when really the things that we're struggling with are the things we need to do more of. So identifying my failures on a regular basis, going, okay, this is the pits today. How do I turn that into the peach tree next week or tomorrow, is another way of letting failures be temporary as opposed to fatal.
Yeah. And just having a positive mindset. I'm smiling ear to ear because my older brother, Dom, mm-hmm. he just says good to everything, right? And it's like, mm-hmm. I don't know if that's good, Hey, Dom, it just broke my arm. Good. Oh, did you even listen to me? But the funniest thing, it's just he's got this mentality. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, this just happened. Good. And I can appreciate it. Sometimes it frustrates me to no avail, but
Mhm.
it is nice to think that like peaches are pits, even the pits are going to end up peaches, or it can be, right?
Mhm.
That's the way I see it. That's the way I want to think is like, shit, this happened for me. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be naive. When you're in a good mindset, good headspace, it's easy to think like that. When you're not and people are stomping on you, it fucking hurts. Like it
Absolutely.
hurts and it gets deeper, it gets darker.
Mhm.
I don't want to be insensitive to that.
Yeah.
What I would say is the key to this, and I've lived and breathed it, is just surround yourself with the good people.
Mhm.
Surround yourself with the people who say, we're going to come out of this or we'll sit
Absolutely.
with you.
Yeah.
I want to say something I've learned so much this year is quietness, stillness can be such a way of relating and just being with someone going through something difficult.
Mhm.
You don't need to be the voice in the room.
Yeah, rarely can our words fix the situation at hand if somebody's in sorrow or grief or pain, but a hug, a meal, just a presence of just somebody that's willing to sit with you while you're in the utmost of pain is absolutely the most valuable thing you can do.
Are there certain things that you would say, when asking, what's your New Year's resolution? And I said, I had a conversation with my therapist about setting this, or for the audience listening to say,
Mhm.
instead of just throwing things out there, right? And there's kind of your staples of throwing things out there. I want to be healthier. I want
Yeah.
to, be more present. I want to be off my phone more, whatever it may
Mhm.
be. But something that might be some advice that would be a little bit different.
Yeah, I read a really great book about willpower, and they talked about how we see our current selves versus how we see our future selves. So, we tend to believe that our future self is a superpower. We'll earn more money, we'll be more fit, we'll do all the things all better. So, if I worked out 0 times this week, but next week I'll work out 5 times. So, we set goals that are astronomically too high. So, I think in general, when we're looking at where we want to improve, which is always a good idea, I say dare to be average. So, if you haven't worked out at all this week, try to go once next week. If you get that one in and you feel good about it, aim for 2. Because what the opposite of that is if we say, I'm going to work out 5 times next week and every week from now on, every week that you get 4, you feel like you failed. So the mental game of that is that like, I've done much better, but my goal was too high. So if you set a small goal that is more attainable, you're more likely to get that goal and then be able to raise the goalpost for yourself without feeling like you keep failing on your goal. So I would say, dare to be average.
Do you think it's worthwhile to reflect heavy on the year prior in order to set some good goals for the coming year?
I think it's a great idea as a practice. I think it's a cultural point where everybody sort of reflects, and I think it's fun that the whole world sort of does this dance. So being in unison with everybody sort of doing that thing, like what did I do last year? What do I want to do next year? It's a really great time to reflect and consider. And yeah, I think it's a great idea to take a beat.
And you know what's kind of fun if you write it down is it holds you a little bit accountable through the year and at the end. I know that last year at the end, I wrote a note to myself. It was actually an email,
Mm.
and it basically said that it said, "What happened in 23?" Like kind of really life changing events or feelings that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my watch outs for 24.
Okay.
So these are the things that I need to watch out for,
Mm-hmm.
that I know are coming my way. They were the health of my twin brother, for example. They were my relationship with my ex-girlfriend. They were business related, and then they were personally driven. Those were my watch outs. And then it was almost to spin it in a positive. It was, what can I do to really excel in this year?
Mm-hmm.
And I know I ended it with saying, like, game on.
Yeah.
Kind of almost a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
And before this episode, I hadn't read it. I kind of skimmed it because I like the idea of reading it almost at New Year's.
Yeah.
But it's really cool. You don't have to hit all of them.
Right.
And you can almost repeat them.
Absolutely.
But it's cool to kind of have that accountability. What would you say to someone who's a little bit upset that maybe they set goals in 24 and as they're looking at it now at the end of the year, that they didn't really do a lot?
I think I think we all fail and make mistakes and things. So I think I would recommend that people be kind to themselves first and also like take a step back and measure were your goals achievable to begin with? Was it something out of character to ask of yourself, or was it something that you'd like to try again? And if you try again, can you make a more meaningful goal? And like you said, I think writing it down adds a sense of accountability. But also, if you tell a good friend or a few friends about it, that adds a whole nother layer of accountability. So if you can involve people who you care about, who care about you, who'll hold you to that goal, that's another great way to improve your likelihood of success.
Yeah, and what's a nice way if you're kind of going around the table or talking, and someone gives you a New Year's resolution, and it's just way too broad?
I think goals in general, if you're having a measurable outcome, if you're going to test a variable, you need to know, like, here's where I'm at, here's where I want to be. How do I measure that? So sometimes the goals are too broad in that they're subjective and they're not measurable. So I would recommend them thinking about a way to quantify that goal if possible.
I love that. Almost saying, okay, if you're saying this, where would you say you're on the scale now?
Mm-hmm.
Where would you like to be at?
Mm-hmm.
And if they say, I want to be, okay, is that a 7? Is that a 10? Where are you on that? I like that.
And then most of the time people will be like, I want to be 100%. I'm like, okay, well, what if we went for 50 right now? Like, what would that look like? How can we measure that? And let's aim for that, because that's improvement from where you are right now.
Yeah, I love that. That scale's awesome. I would say I've thought about this. I know they're coming up, and I think some of the fun is almost waiting to the end of the year, because obviously so much can happen.
Little procrastination.
Yeah, it's like, well, there's still a month left, and, you never really know. But it's come up in conversation. There's so much, especially I've had a crazy growth year, a crazy growth year. And, we touched on a little bit. I think one thing that's important is to have compassion for yourself. First, to know that, like, you're not going to hit all your goals. If you do, I don't think you're setting enough of them. Fair?
Okay, sure.
Fair enough for me. But what I've really learned, and I think something that I would share with friends and the audience, is to dig deeper would seem like, and we've talked about this when someone comes in and meets with you for the first time or a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
What are you really not being honest about with yourself? I think that's a really good place to start. And I think it's also a very hard place to start. Because a lot of the times the stuff we're hiding or not being honest with ourselves, we don't really know we're not being honest with ourselves.
Okay.
And I think if you involve community, especially someone you can trust, that might be a good way to start and say, I trust you. Give me one thing that I really ignore that you keep telling me to watch out.
Yeah.
Would that be a good exercise?
I think that would be a good exercise. And I think, I don't know, it's a catch-22, because sometimes the things that we lie to ourselves about are the things that no one would suspect outside of our own house or our own mind also. So it may not be that your friend is aware of something, but also sometimes they're like, yeah, of course I knew that. So it could go either way. I think you'd have to sort of do some really serious self-reflection to consider what you're struggling with internally the most and how you present externally.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be monumental. I mean, one thing for me was I wasn't really a very good listener. And I think Elliot would tell me that all the time. And my deflection or my defense would be like, well, you don't listen.
Yeah, that's exactly the opposite of active listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so to the tune where if I think back, I'm like, I really wasn't, and I'm working on it, but a good listener, but someone who I trusted and told me that I just got really defensive on it, or I measured it up to someone else as opposed to just having that for myself.
Yeah, that's a really tough but wonderful practice for a lot of the marriage therapy and the couples relationships things, is to be like, okay, so I hear you saying that I'm not doing a good job listening. And you have to reflect on that for a second and be like, I could understand why you say that. I do cut you off sometimes. Sometimes I'm finishing your sentences. Sometimes I'm on to the next idea while you're still trying to explain something. And then you have to go, okay, I would like to work on that.
What's the watch out? I don't want like the watch out that's been the watch out for the last 10 years going into New Year's and really, looking yourself in the mirror, or just having a plan. If you said in today's generation that you see things, I think you're very aware of mental health in today's environment. Going forward into 2025, what would you see as your biggest watch out?
For mental health?
Yes.
I mean, I think it is probably some of the same things we've heard on repeat. I think the biggest problems are sort of multiple layers, but some of the biggest ones, granted, obviously your cell phone use, your screen time. We are disconnected from people, but while we're getting a sense of false connection. So our brains are literally hardwired to seek love, belonging, and connection from our peers, from our family. So what the cellular device does is it provides a false sense of that. So we feel connected, but we haven't connected. So our brain's still like longing, needing, wanting to feel a part of something. And you sort of feel like you're a part of it, but it's hollow and it's shallow and it doesn't really, it's not enough. So we have to like put our screens down, be present. And then also like, I mean, Texas is the absolute worst funded state in the United States, second year running for mental health. So like there are just barriers to care. 75% of kids that have depression or things don't have access to mental health. And if you look at the people who do have insurance, health insurance in Texas, about 20% of those people don't even have mental health coverage. So like in general, like we're not able to treat a lot of people. There's big barriers to getting care. And then our cellular phones are keeping us from having community.
So admittedly, I would say absolutely one of my goals is going to be to put the cell phone away. And when I say away, it will be to go to events, dinners, even in my house, away. When I say away, like to the point where call it airplane mode. What would be a good way of easing into that? Because I think it's an addiction. Like I genuinely think it's not something that you just can do. You can't wake up and do it. Certainly I've not been able to wake up and do it. I'm mindful of my screen time. I used to get excited when I had a high screen time. I'm like 10 hours, new record.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
I used to be proud of it. Now I'm on the opposite where if I go over 7 hours, which is a 30% reduction from what my highest was. 10 hours was on the high. But now I'm aware. And look, there's sometimes it's going to be, it's not going to be accurate data because like I listened to a podcast for an hour. Well, that's an hour of screen time. Or I was making a new mix on Spotify, or there was some reason that I was on the phone. So take the outliers out. But it tells you how long you're on Instagram or other social media. It tells you how long you're texting and other things. But yeah, if you were giving me advice, and I will take it, for someone who's on the phone about 7 hours, that's what it tells me, usually 7 hours a day, mainly work, mainly text messaging, phone calls, but I don't care. It's still screen time.
Yeah.
It is still screen time. It's still mindfulness on a screen. What would be a good way just to go at that to start?
I think that would be a multiple sort of sets of issues too, because like you said, most of it is work. So I think being able to delegate stuff, or also if you have a backup plan, like if somebody really needs to get a hold of you, let them know where you are. Like olden days when, if there was an emergency with the babysitter, they knew what restaurant you were at, they could call that and they could come find you. And that still exists today. You have a reservation, whatever. Like if you're in a restaurant and somebody needs you, like they can find you. And also if you're not even worried about that, then don't worry about that. But if you can delegate that to your assistant, be like, hey, I'm at such and such. If you need me, come find me. And then secondly, also like time boxing. So managing your schedule in a way that a lot of the things that come in are interruptions to what we're really trying to focus on. So scheduling time to respond to these things. So from 8 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock, I might respond to all these emails from yesterday. You're also producing more work, right? I'm going to push all this stuff out. But instead of like one-off responding to every single thing as it comes back, saying like, I'm going to dedicate this hour to responding and doing that work. And then I'm going to dedicate this hour. So I'm planning the times that I will view the interruptions as opposed to the interruptions driving my day.
We get addicted to the mindless, let's check Instagram or another social network when we have no time. And we're like, oh, well, this will keep me busy. I'm anxious. I can't just look at the wall. I can't just do something that doesn't have me moving. Anyways, to each their own. What I can be vulnerable and say, and I will hold myself accountable. And you just gave it, it's a scale. On a scale from 1 to 10, how good am I about putting my phone away? I'll give myself a 5 right now. I am certainly not the worst. I'm certainly nowhere near close to where I'd want to be. I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
And hopefully when we check back, whether it's 3, 6, 9 months, see, the thing is, I don't want to wait till December of 25 to be at a 9 or a 10. It actually upsets me now when I'm on the phone too much. That's the awareness, but now I want to fix it. And I think it's a good place to kind of end on the New Year's resolutions is give yourself accountable, reachable goals.
Yeah.
Little wins. And then give yourself compassion. A lot of the times the things we're talking about, they're not the easiest things to change and do. Otherwise, we would do them.
Can I add one thing to this? That the thing we're talking about with screen time is we're saying, oh, you should put it away. And I think we're all addicted, right? So if I tell addicts to stop doing the thing they're doing, they're like, because it's a coping skill, it's a mechanism, it's a thing we're also habituated to doing. So instead of thinking about like, I can't look at my phone right now, which will drive most people up the walls, think about like, I want to tune in. I want to be present for this moment right now. I want to show up with my kids right now. I want to have this dinner and really, really engage and talk to my friends without thinking about this. So leave it in the car, put it in your purse, put it away where you can't see it. And putting it on the table is not less rude, even if it's upside down. So like really like put it away and really focus on tuning in as opposed to like, I'm not allowed to look at my phone right now. The devices play really squarely into our desire to figure out what's on to the next. So that thing, even when you're in therapy, was like, you're just ready to go to the next thing, which I get. We're all in that space. And I just listened to this amazing mindful meditation the other day. And he was just talking about how we go through life much like a donkey with a carrot in front of our faces, like from kindergarten to grade school to middle school to high school. And we're like always on to the next. And we just have this grind culture where it's like, what's next? What's next? What's next?
And I think it was Alan Watts who said it. He said, picture your life. And now imagine that you can see the outcome for the rest of your life, whether it be 20 years, 40 years, 60 years. And you're like, wow, that was amazing. And you get returned back to where you are now. It's okay, you can do this again. You're like, okay. And you go do it again. And you create a little bit more craziness and you live a little bit more on the edge and you fantasize about more things and it all happens. And then you bring yourself back to right now. And he says, go do it again. You're like, I'd rather not. Because the not knowing is the life that you're living right now. It's the excitement, the fact that all these things are possible. And whether you live and see them or not is the fun.
Right.
So kind of get lost in the moment that all these things could happen. But until they do, you're just living. You're living in the present. And I found that to be calming.
It is. And also, even when you imagine this dream life that you have and then you come back to like your real life, like how much different are they? Like I'm living my dream life on a daily basis. I'm so grateful for all the things it's amazing. And I know not everybody could say that, but even then, like the things that you struggle with oftentimes aren't, as much as you picture. So if 70% of your life is your dream life, that's still pretty close. And let's take that and make your New Year's resolution the other 30. How do we work on that?
What do you think the practices that I either should keep doing or be watchful for in what I want to be an added growth year?
So that's a great question. And that's actually one of my favorite questions in my intake in all therapy appointments is really, what are your top 3 goals? Like, what do you want to get from this time, from this thing together? And I never want to say that I know what you should do better than you know what you should do. So I think I'd really like you to think about that and you answer the question.
Yeah. And I appreciate that because really what you're doing is exactly what I need to work on. And it's digging deep to be honest with myself. And it's what you preach is that we come into your space with these lies and they're not intentional lies, but they're lies to ourselves. And you're absolutely right. It's on me to really look in the mirror and say, we're human. We're human beings. We're perfectly imperfect. And we'll always be that way.
Yeah.
But what are the things that we want to, I'd say, prioritize as important changes in our life? We'll never get through the full list. I don't think we ever should. But there's things that we can make a difference in our daily lives with the people we care about That's how I'm going to prioritize it. And the beauty of January 1, even though it's cliche, is it is the start of a new year.
Yeah. Cliches have such a bad rep for like being cliche, like it's terrible. But I do sometimes think there's some wisdom in some of these old habits and rituals. You know?
I keep saying it. It's cliche, but cliche is for a reason because they're real.
There's some weird ones out there, but definitely there's some value in certain things.
Yeah, the ones that I kind of keep saying, I'm like, it sounds cliche, and I almost like dismiss it. I'm like, I don't mean to be cliche, but like, damn, it's real, and we should listen to it or at least be aware of it.
That's going to be a goal for me next year, to not discount what I'm about to say before I say it. It's more vulnerable to put it out there and like see if people pick it up than to be like, this might sound crazy or this might sound whatever, because I do that to myself, and then I know whatever I said is less valuable than if I just said it.
I tend to do it too. And I think I learned it from my mom. She was on the podcast, and one of it was like, it's like just saying something and then dismissing it right away. Even with a person, like again, we lie to ourselves, but I don't think I'm judgmental, but I might say, I don't like that, but then quickly say something that diverts attention to making them feel better, make this not go away or something. I don't like it. I do not like it. I want to change it. And you mentioned it. And I have this thing with my friend now too, Andrew, and we both say, we're not going to say we're crazy. We're not we're not going to say, I have this crazy idea before we say something. Not going to do it. And I say that, but give me a way, because you're holding yourself accountable. How do we do that?
I think this would be small sort of practices. What I tell people to do is, when you're aware of that, you might say, this is going to sound crazy. Instead of formulating it, taking another second and being like, this is actually what I want to say. And if it's not, regroup, say something else. But if it is something that you wanted to communicate, but you're not sure how it's going to land, which I think is what most people do, because it's people pleasing. Like, I want to say this, but then I'm like, oh, but they might think I'm crazy. Or I want to posit this idea, even though they might not be ready to hear it. And just practicing in small ways, saying it, and then just taking a deep breath and watching how it lands. So put your science hat on and experiment with these things and see how it lands, and practice in small ways on repeat until you really, this isn't about how it lands as much as how you feel about what you're saying. So when you practice it over time, you can start to be more self-assured that what I'm saying is aligned with my core values, with what I mean, with what I'm interested in, with what my friends like about me. And then I feel more sure of what I'm saying.
Dismissing, I love that. I'm going to hold you accountable to that.
Okay.
So great. Well, this has been a pleasure. And I hope, and I know we're going to check in with each other and see where we're at on our New Year's resolutions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Alex Perry on Fire. It means so much to me and the wonderful team that makes this all possible. I'm now passing the flame to you. Please follow, like, and subscribe so you can always stay up to date. Thanks again, and stay fired up.